Okay, it's 9:04, so we'll actually start in 1 minute because I want to respect our guests' time and all of your time as well. So as people join in, I'll keep adding them and we can continue the conversation. Okay, hi everyone. We have just a couple of people, and I think some people will join as we continue with our session and the conversation. Very excited to welcome you all to the inaugural, actually, the first regional sessions hosted by the United Nations Department for Global Communications Youth Representatives Steering Committee. As I mentioned throughout the chat, please do keep your microphone muted so that we can engage in conversation. And if you haven't done yet, please in the chat tell us where you're joining from and what industry or what you're working on right now, even if you are a student. So a little bit about the Youth Representative Steering Committee. It was established in 2009 by the United Nations Department for Global Communications Civil Society Unit. And the primary goal is to actually serve as an advocacy platform to bring together young people ages 18 to 32 to lead and advocate for issues focused on the agenda of the United Nations, primarily on youth issues and youth conversations to generate outreach and to also kind of have a conversation about, what are the recurring themes and to bring experts from around the world so that we can kind of learn about, issues that are pertinent to youth in the next decade. So we have a QR code here. If you are interested in learning more about the Youth Representative Steering Committee, please do scan it and it'll take you to the webpage. A little bit of an introduction for the regional sessions. Taking that mandate of the Youth Representative Steering Committee, we host regional sessions starting in 2024, and we hope that it serves as a launch pad to creating an emphasis and outreach on the next decade's issues about youth and the solutions or the interventions that are available. So this is the inaugural chat, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today. Our guest is Daniel Gonzalez. Daniel is a current master's student at Yale School of the Environment, where he's getting a degree in environmental management. He's originally from Colombia. He's invested in creating a more sustainable planet for future generations at the intersection of business, tech, and sustainability. And that's why he's the perfect guest for our session today. His past experience lies in business strategy, program and product management, and GIS across the United States, Denmark, and Colombia. As an EDF Climate Core Fellow, he's a technical program manager at Google in their climate operations team, focused on data and software climate solutions. He's also worked at ESRI and the World Resources Institute. More recently, he started hosting climate chats where he talks to people looking to transition into a career in climate. So I'm hoping he can share some wisdom with us today and tips. Maybe there are people here interested in transitioning into a career in climate. But more importantly, we also have a QR code so that you can scan and connect with Daniel on LinkedIn as well, and we highly recommend you to do so. And a little bit about me. I am your host today. My name is Nipuna Ambanpola. I serve as the Executive Director of I Volunteer International and also a member of the Youth Resources Steering Committee. And I also have a QR code so that you can scan and connect with me on LinkedIn and continue this conversation. And the topic of today's regional session is lurking variable, using data and technology for public good. And we're interested in talking about lurking variables. What's the noise? What are the human conditions? What are the sociological human behaviors that are important to keep in mind as we, deliver climate solutions and have these conversations. So I'm gonna stop my screen share and I'm gonna spotlight our guest and myself for everybody. Okay, Daniel, thank you so much for being here and joining us today for this conversation.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know just before the call, I kind of changed up our line of discussion a little bit because you have a very inspiring story, right? You're from Colombia, and now on LinkedIn, right, you put your tagline saying you're on your path to, gaining a career in sustainability and climate, but also your goal of, becoming a chief sustainability officer. So tell us a little bit about your transition into climate and sustainability and what you've learned and how you kind of built your story that way.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I started putting that tagline, and I think more people started like looking at my profile and started resonating with it. Which for me at the time, I just needed a tagline. Like I honestly was just like, I need something like an interesting and inspiring. Like maybe I could write this. But it's resonated with I think a lot of people, and have gotten some yeah great feedback on that. I think overall for me, the purpose of it is as a person, I need a point B. Like I need somewhere to go towards. Whether I get to it or not, whether it takes me 30 years or 10 or 5 or next month, like I just need some sort of direction. When you have a purpose and a journey and a direction, like you also have like you now have a way forward that maybe previously was only in your mind in like random words. Like I think many times we have a lot of thoughts in our minds about what we want to become, but we don't write it down. We don't make it public. We don't state it to everyone. And so yeah, I think that's why I started writing from low income immigrant to chief sustainability officer. I could speak more about my story as well. I think I lived in Colombia, I was born in Colombia, but then I also was raised in the US. So I've moved between the two countries a lot. And I think that's also shaped the way I think about the world because you see two very different types of realities in all shapes, like in all ways. Like in Colombia, we dance a lot more than maybe in the US. But in the US, people tend to have like more disposable income. I mean, there's so many differences. And I think that's maybe who I am as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when you actually share your mission, right, your personal statement for yourself, now you create that brand around you, right?
Hmm.
Because one of the best examples I can give is when I nominated you, right, as a guest with my group, Youth Representative Steering Committee, they can go to your profile and say, hey, what is Daniel about? Right. And they see that
Hmm.
tagline, hey, Daniel is working, this is the goal, right? And you're sharing, I think, personally, I have felt it this way as well. When I look at your profile and the work that you do, I know your brand, I know where you're going. It's almost as if you're sharing that directional power with everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think part of it too is that it's okay if like even though that's my direction right now, it's okay if it changes, right? But it's the point is having a direction. Because we can go in circles for years sometimes and think about like, oh, I want to have a career in climate or I want to have a career in data or whatever it is, but then not actually take steps towards it. And I think that's more dangerous than anything else.
I agree. I agree. Having changed a lot of direction myself, I completely resonate with that. Okay, so Daniel, clearly with your story, you are engaged a lot in the sustainability space, right? Various discussions, advocacy, interventions. Um, so on a very broader level, right? How is data used to determine sustainability interventions? And from your experience, when these interventions are delivered, what are some gaps and challenges on a very broader level that you have seen from your experience?
Yeah, so this question is interesting because it's a little bit difficult to answer depending on what domain you're looking at. And so, when you talk about sustainability and climate, you're talking about almost every single aspect of like the human condition. And so you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about the built environment, you're talking about supply chain, you're talking about technology. Um, Everything is, I think, going to be affected by climate change and also has to do a part with sustainability. And so when we're talking about data within sustainability, the first question I always have is like, okay, first thing is narrow down your scope. What type of sustainability are we talking about? What type of climate? And I can give a few examples. So, um, like satellite imagery. So NASA and a lot of other agencies, take pictures of the Earth. They throw satellites up in the air and the satellites go around the Earth and they start taking pictures. And these pictures tell us, for example, where our coastlines are. And if you get enough pictures from enough time, you start seeing that the coastlines are slowly eroding in some places, or I mean, depending on where you are in the world.
Mm.
And that's a type of data. But another type of data is also like Excel sheets and tabular data, like how many carbon emissions are coming from different parts of my company, and where are they coming from? And that comes in an Excel spreadsheet. And so depending on which data you're using, you have different solutions and different methods. But overall, I think being as clear as possible with where your data is coming from, what your data actually is, and any ways you can improve it are like, I think the three main things I think about when I look at a new data set. In terms of what like gaps and challenges, these are also these also vary, but um, the biggest challenge I think is just people who are willing to engage with the data. Um, and you can there's people doing this work, but I think there should be more. And I think we don't all have to be experts on like NASA satellite imagery to try to have fun and play with that data. And we'll get things wrong, and that's totally okay. But I think we need more people like engaged in the data side. And for some reason, people are so scared of technology. Like like we can use Instagram or we can use social media or our phones easily, but when it comes to like something that's a little bit outside of that, a lot of people become afraid and don't want to like just think that there's this huge barrier. And the reality is everyone started from zero on this. Everyone. Like your first line of code is usually like hello world, and it's one line. Like everyone starts there. And so if anyone's interested in a career in tech, I definitely encourage to start playing around with the different data that exists in sustainability.
Yeah, I hear you. And just before I go into my next question, because this is, I think, creating a perfect segue to it.
Hmm.
Typically we see, right, a lot of data collected from various different partners and stakeholders, in the private sector for different incentives, maybe increasing efficiency in the supply chain, maybe responding to some sort of public demand, right, of having
Hmm.
sustainable supply chains and products. And then maybe public agencies trying to deliver public interventions, right? You said, NASA looking at coastal erosion, maybe delivering either, insurance, relocations, right, and planning for the future. And sometimes what I've seen is, you have instruments, you collect the data, and then somehow this sort of intervention eliminates maybe local thought, right? The actual stakeholders, and kind of remove that co-production feature where you actually have now and have conversations with, hey, what do you feel? Let's say, as an example, because of erosion planning, maybe now you need to have insurance, or now you need to relocate. And then how is the emotion, the actual human behavior of the local residents maybe in that area, right? What are your priorities in socioeconomic conditions? And it's always interested me how that piece, sometimes when the intervention is delivered, there is a gap, right? What are your thoughts about, how to engage those local stakeholders, right, in decision-making process, and maybe specifically young people, like what is their role in delivering these solutions from the data?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think it's the responsibility of the person who's making this data and like sharing it, let's say to their CEO or to their stakeholders, whoever it is, to also always know within themselves that this is just one part of the entire picture. If we let me put it this way, if the data were enough, then there wouldn't be a climate crisis. Like we know what the data is about climate change and about environmental um all of the environmental problems that we currently have. Like yes, do we need more specificity in some areas, and do we need more like data collection in some others? Yes, but in general we know what the trend is, we know we know what it's about. But yeah, we're still faced with a lot of backlash on climate change issues. We're faced with a lot of differing opinions on things, and so the data isn't enough. And that's where we're going to local communities really um, plays a big part. And I think, for example, for like zoning commission, right? I was earlier on in my career, I was part of a planning and zoning commission in Pennsylvania, where basically people complained about like, oh, this person put a tree too close to my sidewalk, or like things on that nature. Um, but every week on Wednesdays from like I think 7 to 9 p.m., we would have an open discussion. So anyone from the community could come in and talk about um, upcoming projects, or new buildings that were going to be built, or taxes, or whatever they wanted to talk about within planning and zoning. And what struck me was, because it was like two months of that, that I was in that role, and every single week there was the same two or three people that would show up, and they were two or three people, and they were pushing things. Like, they were very vocal about what they wanted, and they would restrict some of the projects that were to be developed. But the only reason that they were able to have so much power is because they were the only ones that showed up. It was the three or four people. It wasn't the hundreds, even thousands of the community. And so I think there's some issues there with, one, like, is the right forum of Wednesday 7 to 9 p.m. Community chat? Like, I don't know. And the other question too is, okay, maybe people don't feel like their voices can make a difference. But on a local level, that's where your voices tend to make the biggest difference. Especially if you're just starting out and you don't have a big platform. Like, that's where you can create the biggest impact. Um, I also think that in terms of leadership, and like, how can youth take a leading role, um, one has to do a process of self-reflection first before anything else. You have to know who you are and what you stand for before you can start telling other people who you are and what you stand for. And I think managers and CEOs tend to do this, but youth tends to kind of say, I believe in this issue, and that's it. I'm going to go forward with this issue. But you haven't asked yourself, how am I well positioned to move this issue forward? Some people love public speaking, not many, but some people do, and maybe that's how they move things forward. They go on rallies and marches. But some people are more introverted and might want to have these one-on-one conversations, or might want to draft a response letter to the government, whatever it is. But your style of leadership will influence how you take charge of the people around you as well, and how you actually create change. And so I think that self-reflection process, I tell people all the time in different, like, career transitions, that self-reflection is 80% of your first month of job searching. Like, who are you? What do you want to become? Like, what's your next path? All that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
No, no, I hear you. And a couple of things that came to mind is from the conversations that I've had personally with a lot of, hundreds of volunteers that we work around the world. They're very passionate about engaging themselves in a local cause, right? Whether it be climate or some other cause. And the challenge they often see is where to get themselves plugged in. Because from the information we consume, there's some sort of conflict happening, and then we scroll up, and then there's an environmental crisis, and then we scroll up, and then there's another crisis. So there's sort of like this information overload, and trying to navigate where, how do I position myself maybe in a couple of causes where I'm passionate about, and how do I inject my skills to, just like you said, right, move this cause forward. I think, to your point, we underestimate the power and the value of local engagement, right? Going to city council meetings, sitting there and voicing your opinions, filling out those surveys, and even running for local elections, because a
Yeah.
lot of change actually happens at that level. And understanding that it's okay to be learning about one cause, and to be an ally about another cause, and to be maybe an activist and an advocate on another cause, right? We need everybody to stay on the spectrum. And everybody can't be an activist on all causes, and understanding that positioning.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that resonates a lot because, um, you know, for example, like, I talk a lot about climate, obviously, but I also talk a lot about immigration, and visas and green cards, and that's been a whole another bit of my, I guess, platform. Um, and I'm starting to talk a little bit more about leadership and coaching, and those are intentional, right? Because if I were to respond to, let's say, every single event that happens in this world, one, I think I would be so overwhelmed that I'd like sit at my house and not do anything ever. But also, two, it doesn't move anyone forward by me just taking in the news. I also have to react to it and do something out in the world. And you can't do that for every single issue that comes up. Like, as much as I know everyone wants to try, like, no one's gonna say, like, we need to like fight poverty, reduce world hunger. We need to fight for women's rights. Like, all these things are important, obviously. But we as individuals, like, have a balancing act between our individual internal focus and what's externally happening in the world. And if we're too in tune with our internal, then we don't have a higher purpose for what's happening out externally. And if we're too in tune with the external, then our internal selves just completely blow up, and you're just it's done. So yeah, I think choosing, being specific, narrowing down is really, really important. And it's the hardest thing to do. No matter if you're 18, 35 or older, it's that choosing takes a lot of time and energy.
Absolutely. And I think, you're helping me in this. You're creating perfect bridges into our discussion points. So we spoke about data, right? Like how is data collected at the highest level? What are some of the examples of projects that are being delivered, maybe in the private sector, public sector? And then we spoke about the role of, youth, really understanding the value of that local power, right? Maybe engaging in decision making through organizations, realizing what are your expertise, which causes you want to contribute to, and then having a self-reflection on how you can contribute to move the needle. Now let's go back to, a little bit about the data, but the data that's missing, the lurking variable, the topic of our session today, when all of these, models are built, all of these interventions are delivered, there are sometimes data points that are hard to collect, to be honest, and sometimes often, not collected because of those challenges like feelings, emotions, human behavior, fear, right? So what are some of the, from a sociological perspective, right? What are some of those variables that in the climate space, these, maybe leaders, right? Organizations, partners need to keep in mind as they deliver these solutions that are actually truly hard to grapple with? Things like fear, emotion, tension, that sometimes truly drive human behavior forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, you know, behavioral economics, for example, is a great field where this plays a part. People did studies on if I have my product, let's say, I don't know, cereal, on eye level, and like I'm on the grocery store and it's eye level, it's on the shelf. Am I more likely to buy it than if it's down low or up high? And the answer is yes, right? And that's a bit of a sociological perspective as well. It's like me as a human, as I interact with the world, like what choices and decisions am I making, sometimes unconsciously, most times unconsciously, that make me, buy cereal or make me engage in the public sector or do whatever. So there's two ways to answer the question. If you can collect the data, then by all means do it. But I mean, like for example, there's a leadership course that I helped build with someone here at the Yale School of the Environment, and there's 50,000 people enrolled in it. And by the way, it's Coursera, so like 50,000 people enrolled. How many people actually finish it is a lot. Is a lot less. Like let's be real. But people fill out this survey of what do you want to get out of the course and whatnot, like what are you struggling with, and you have the purely quantitative side of like how confident are you in leadership from 1 to 5, and so you fill that out. But you also have this like what issues are you facing, and to read 50,000 responses from what issues are you facing is just like is very difficult to do. Like I scrolled through it, but I didn't read every single response. It's just too much. It will take too much time. And so there are ways of addressing that. Of course, you can get like sentiment analysis and be like, okay, let's take all of these responses and kind of get a sense: are people happy, sad, mad, angry, whatever? That's fine. But like that's not that's I don't think that's enough of what we can do with that type of data. I think that type of data is really what moves people's emotions, and especially decision makers' emotions as well. So, for example, I can say after taking this course, people moved from a 3 to a 4 on a 5 point scale of how confident they felt in leadership. And 50,000 people responded to that. And sure, like people will be like, oh, that's great data. But if I also say this person was struggling through a marriage and at the end, like, or was thinking about divorce and struggling with marriage, and at the end, this course helped them create a stronger relationship with their partner. That's emotional. That triggers a different part of our mindset that it depends on our decision maker, but like that might be more moving than the 50,000 people who moved from a 3 to a 4. And so it's really thinking about when and how to use these different types of data to engage the people who actually make decisions. um, One last thing to note here too is I truly believe that we need to, in our effort to include more people in the climate movement, we also need to take a step back from this position of like always being righteous and always being right. And I think we've moved so far into like, oh, the IPCC said it, and so now the world is going to follow suit. And it's just that's not how the world works. The world has biases. The world has different tensions. I think it's more important to focus on those tensions of like meeting people where they are versus having people try to come to us. But that's a whole different discussion as well.
No, that's true because, and I think part of it plays into the caliber of leadership that's driving these solutions, right? And their intentionality and their maybe intelligence in a sense to be able to capture that holistic perspective of the issues that they're working with, right? Because uh, some of the issues also actually some of the issues also sort of conflict with each other, right? I've had conversations of climate. I'm actually not an expert in the climate space, but I've had conversations because those issues intertwine with other issues that young people face, and some of those conversations go like this. Some of the families or some of the groups of people that I'm working with are actually worried about bringing food to their plate tomorrow, and they are unable, right? They are disempowered from thinking about climate solutions at all. And their local government or policymakers may be continuously talking about issues that are higher up, at least to them, when they're worried about, short-term challenges, right? So really keeping in mind that these issues are intertwined, and don't necessarily operate in silos is, I think, going back to your point of being able to understand that, at a very deep level of the human connection.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I've talked to some people here at the school that do agriculture work and work with farmers all the time, and this conversation happens nonstop. It's like, why that's going to happen in 20 years? Climate change is going to happen in 20 years. Like, why should I be doing something now? I think when it works well, there's some like beautiful like midpoint solutions, which include things like, you know, sometimes it's a local government. Like for example, like usually farmers to go into more like sustainable agriculture need 3 or 4 years to change their practices and like change their soils and all these different things. I mean, it depends on the crop and there's so much variation. But like let's say it's 3 to 4 years. If the government could provide a subsidy for those 3 to 4 years, that's a middle point between government saying you need to focus on climate change and the farmers saying I need to focus on next year or this year's harvest. And so it's like solutions like that where you essentially negotiate, what you want, what the government or the world in a sense wants, and how to get to that middle point. And this happens not just in agriculture; it happens in energy all the time with renewable energy sources or like just energy transition plans, all sorts of different things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, thank you so much. I know we've gone through a lot, and about 30 minutes is definitely not enough for this much of a large issue to talk about. But thank you for reflecting on your journey, sharing us, the importance of self-reflection, some of the tips of how young people can get injected into their local community to in a sense of advocacy, right? And really understanding what are the skills and expertise and how they can realize themselves to inject themselves in these causes to move the needle forward. I'm gonna since you were okay with it at the beginning, I'm gonna kind of provide some space for maybe 2 questions from our audience, if that's okay, for a Q&A. So what I really encourage our participants, if they do have a question, we may have space for maybe 2 questions. Definitely use the reactions button on the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen and raise your hand. And as they come along, I will actually call on you to ask a question so that you can, unmute yourself and, ask us if you have any questions. And we have lots of great input in the chat as well. So I'll definitely make sure to save them and Daniel share them with you as well.
I'm reading through them right now, so it's super interesting to see all these comments.
All right, I'm gonna wait for about another 30 seconds maybe. If anybody would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand using the reactions button. I wanted to give some time for the questions to come.
It makes my job easier if there's no hard pressing questions. So
Hello. Can I ask one
hey,
question?
Yeah, hi,
yeah,
Natal. Go for it.
Okay, I'm Naftali from Nigeria. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing these great insights. So I was going to ask, you talked about immediately when you posted, stuffs around sustainability, that is your profile, you started getting some kind of traffic. I wanted to understand how does that made you feel, and did that actually influence some of your, will I say, your thoughts towards looking at what are the kind of areas you should be focusing on in terms of developing yourself in that particular area? And would you mind sharing, some of the actions you took and what organizations you've associated yourself with since then? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think as you're like I started my main platform has been on LinkedIn since like several years ago. I have an Instagram. I barely use it. Don't have any other social media. And so when we're talking just about the social media space, because I think there's another space which is like my day-to-day interactions with like people from the Yale School of the Environment and Google and all that other side. But from the social media space, like your first few posts, like I think no one saw them. Like LinkedIn tells you how many people see your posts, and I think it was like one person or five or something, and you start thinking, okay, so like what can I either do better from my posts? Like how do I get more traction and all these different things? And that's how you start building an audience. So, that might mean that your first sentence has to be more intriguing or interesting, or that might mean that, you have to go and reach out to people on LinkedIn and like be like, hey, like look at this post that I made or something like that. I don't know. So that takes a lot of time and process. And during that process, you also get feedback from people. So I'm taking a leadership class right now, and one of the exercises we had to do is like throw ideas into the middle of a classroom. So let's say there's 30 of us and you throw an idea out. And if no one resonates with that idea, no one says anything. And so like you throw out an idea like, I want to become the president, let's say, or whatever your thing is. And if no one says anything to you, that means that didn't resonate with anyone in that group. And so and the learning there is that you can throw something out, and if no one resonates, then you take that as feedback for what you're sharing to the world. And so maybe you don't have the right audience, but also maybe you need to reframe it in a way that does make sense for everyone else. And so for me, I think one of the biggest reframings has been like, how do we engage climate and sustainability, people who are interested in climate and sustainability when they have no background in any of it. And that's something that I've gotten feedback on. I like 5 years ago, that wasn't what I thought I was going to be doing within climate, and now that's definitely what I'm focused on. In terms of associations and things to partner with or people to partner with, overall, I think doing due diligence on like who you want to be included in your brand is important. So for example, I've partnered with someone who's now director of a different company, but used to be sustainability at Amazon. And she and I had like a year-long conversation before we decided to do a collaborative article together where we share a new concept. Like it took a while. It took that year of like building connections and reputation and trust between each other. But like that's kind of it just depends on who you're talking with as well. Like I think United Nations, for example, right, like is a known brand and has a lot already established, and so it's a different conversation than like someone who you might not know as well, and what they might represent. You have to like try to figure it out. Yeah, I hope I answered your question, and happy to take another one if anyone has one. You can ask about anything. Like if you want to ask about like grad school or career transitions or anything, like feel free.
Thank you, Naftali. We may have time for one more question. All right. For to keep the time, on time, I'm going to close it out. But Daniel, thank you incredibly so much for joining us today and for sharing your experience and expertise. I think the conversation went really well, especially as the inaugural regional sessions chat. So thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who joined this call as well. We are actually going to be posting this video live, in a couple of minutes. So you'll actually be able to view it. We shared some slides, and we also had information about Daniel's and mine, LinkedIn accounts for you to connect and continue this chat further. So I invite you to join us to review the beginning part of it if you want that on the NGO Youth Changemakers channel on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We do not have a LinkedIn account yet. So I invite you to kind of join and look through this video again, and invite you to join on LinkedIn with us as well. Daniel, thank you so much. I hope everybody has an extraordinary weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.